everybody. Welcome to La Lista. I am your host, Ruben Mendive. Today we have a new guest here, and I like to start off each interview by having my guests introduce themselves. So your name and how you identify for the people at home.
Awesome. My name is Carlos Foglia, or Carlos Foglia, depending on who you're talking to. I am a LatinX writer from Los Angeles via Boston, Dominican, Argentinian, and raised by an incredible Puerto Rican. So lots of spices and flavors in that mix. So.
Perfect. And so you led me to my follow-up is, where are you from? And like, what's the short version? What's the long version that you tell people?
I was born in Santo Domingo a few years ago, a few decades ago. We won't say exactly. It was 41 years ago. So, you can see a couple gray hairs if you're picturing me. I was born in Santo Domingo. We moved to the States when I was 3. My mother, my biological mother, who was the Dominican half, left the family, and my father raised me up until when he got remarried when I was 7 to this wonderful Puerto Rican woman named Maria, the most beautiful sound I've ever heard. And I grew up in Boston. I moved to Boston after that and spent about 20 years in Boston. I went to high school there, went to college there, ended up falling into the music world, and then this is the really short version, and then moved to LA about 10 years ago when I decided to keep telling my stories in my version, and ended up segueing into the written television form.
And so I do like to get like a family history. So like, what is like your parents' story, your grandparents' story? What do you know about them?
My father has one of those, God, what was the movie called? Was it Big Peach or Giant Peach? Big Fish. It was Big Fish, that movie where his life seems unbelievable. Literally, like sometimes I'm like, did that really happen, Dad? Because, parents. But my dad was born in Buenos Aires to 2 Italian immigrants who had just come off the boat years before. He was born a long time ago. He was really old. He was born in 1926. So he ended up actually being one of Evita and Juan Perón's personal bodyguards. So like kind of their version of the Secret Service. He was a huge fan of tango. There was this famous Argentine tango singer named Carlos Gardel, who not only am I named after first name, but I have his middle name too. So he was Carlos Romualdo Gardel. I am Carlos Romualdo Foglia. So he really was a big fan of Argentine culture. My mother was born in the DR, half native and half Spanish. So there's a lot going on there. I guess everybody's pretty much half and half in the Caribbean. And she was very young, and they got married, and I want to say a happy accident, but I don't know how happy it was, because I don't think it was expected. But long story short, I don't fault her, but she spent a couple of years as a much younger bride and mother to my dad and to myself, and she said I got to go, and took off. And so that really changed me as far as what the family dynamics of it all was when I was a kid. And thankfully, I got I was lucky enough to have my stepmother come into the picture. Again, her name Maria. And the classic, I hated her because she was my stepmother and she was stealing my dad's love, yada, 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 turned into an admiration, respect, and undying just gratitude for what she did for me. And I'm here just as much as because of my dad as I am because of my mom, my stepmom. And my father passed away about 9 years ago, and that's actually, not to jump the shark, but that's actually influenced a lot of my writing since then, and really pushed me along, because a lot of the stuff that I do is for him and for his memory.
What are your memories, your experience of like Argentina? Like,
well, the funny thing is, I've never been. Having been born in Santo Domingo, this is actually was a huge cultural kind of Valhalla / promised land in my mind growing up, because I had never been. But the Dominican part of my life, my mother was out of the picture. So I was raised by an Argentinian who, the stereotypes be that as they may, typical Argentinians tend to be a little proud, a little too proud, a little too, hey, we're European, but like not really. So there was a disdain showered upon Caribbean culture by my, proud Argentine father that I would always battle against, because I'd be like, but Dad, I'm also half Dominican. Don't forget. So I'd never been to Argentina, but I was fully raised in that Argentinian mindset about being proud, about orgullo, as they call it, Maradona and Messi and this and this and that. But I've never been. And so I have, you'll see it, but they won't be able to see it, but I have my dad's ashes on that shelf right there. And, one of his, well, I guess literally one of his last wishes was to be sprinkled in Argentina. So I do have a Mecca type, a travel journey planned, but can't go this year. Can't go next year probably. But eventually I will make my first visit there, and I'll have the catharsis of, dropping my dad off.
Yeah. And so, like, how did your parents meet?
My dad was a businessman and a businessman, and, he had a bunch of export, import, restaurants, this and that, all over the Caribbean. After he had left his first marriage, he kind of ended up bouncing around through all the different islands. My passport as a kid is crazy. It's stamped with like 15 different locations. San Martin, Curacao, all these places that I wish I remember being because they seem pretty cool. But he was kind of bouncing around, and he kind of made a mini home base in Santo Domingo. Met my my biological mother probably at some kind of fancy meeting or some kind of event. And 9 months later, hey guys, I'm here to stay.
And so, like, what's your relationship with like Santo Domingo? Like, how does that influence you?
It's it's interesting. I again, for a third of my life, I kind of put it on the back burner. It was one of those things because I think my father having been so not happy with the way it ended with my mother leaving. It's kind of like how Tom Brady is now on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Like, I have those memories, but I'm really mad at Tom Brady right now. So like I don't want to talk about Tom Brady. So like I just don't. I'm being from Boston. It hurts every time. Mookie Betts is about to win a World Series with the Dodgers, or I guess when we listen to this, they'll probably have won a World Series. You're welcome, Los Angeles. And so it hurts. It hurts a lot. So with my dad, it really hurt. And so he kind of tried to like put all of the Dominicanness of my life in a little package that, to be opened later. Well, he died, 8-9 years ago. And that's, I think, when I really started to open that package. And I really started to say, hey, it's okay to be proud of being Argentine and be proud of being Dominican and be proud of the roots that come with that. And also be proud about my stepmother, who's Puerto Rican. So I was raised in a lot of those customs. I really started to really dive into it and really go into my history, into the DNA of it all. Like, I didn't know that I had, 25% African blood in me, or 10% Middle Eastern blood, and 15% Spanish blood, like from Spain. And then the other 46% is Italian. Like, I didn't know any of that until all the tests started coming in. And so it really opened up the ability for me to really tap into all those things that are inside me culturally. And the benefit has been immeasurable. Like, I'm so proud of where I am, where I'm from, where I've come from, and the places that I've been along the way.
And so, like, what brought your family to Boston?
My brother from my father's first marriage, he had 3 kids with his first wife, had just graduated UMass Amherst in like 1986, 1985. And he had gotten a job at Raytheon making missiles. During the first Gulf War, they had those famous Patriot missiles. He was one of the industrial engineers in charge of that whole process. And he just graduated. He was alone in New England. He was like, hey, your wife left. You want to come hang out? And, for me, it was like the greatest thing in the world. It was the 3 dudes, the 3 generations moving up to Boston, and lots of Nintendo and lots of having fun. And it was amazing. So we just moved up there, set up shop, moved to a little town called North Andover, which is about 30 miles outside of Boston, and just had a great time there till I went off to college for the next 10 years.
Yeah. So how would you describe, your childhood, like, and then especially your town, for someone that's never been there? Like, what was that like?
My dad was always the industrious type. It was one business after another, which I think is pretty common in Latino culture. And so I think within a year or 2 of us living up there, he had a bakery and he had a restaurant, and then he had another bakery that was in the works. Because it's all about working with your own hands and making it happen, especially back then. So growing up was really interesting because I was trying to assimilate to that culture in New England. I had never been in New England. New England's a very specific flavor, or as they would say, flavor. And also, my father, being the stubborn one that he was, for example, never learned English. So I would leave the house and it would be like English with a weird fucking accent. And then I would come back inside the house and there'd be no English allowed. So it was a constant dichotomy, constant balancing act of like, pride, Argentina, Spanish, proper, Puerto Rican, this. And then you walk outside and it's like, we're very proper. It's North Andover, Massachusetts. We're going to go to have sleigh and all this stuff. And so it was always a big learning curve. And thankfully, things like television, things like the Flintstones and the Jetsons and, cartoons, I was able to learn English. And, they do say that there's a certain age cutoff where you can learn and end up being able to really master the language, which is why I don't have a Spanish accent, which is also hilarious because I'm sure you, like me, we've all been asked why we don't have an accent 15,000 times a year. But growing up with the culture inside, it was very insular and it was very proud, and having to juggle it with everything outside, which I'm sure is a common theme with a lot of Latinx people, was something that I think also helped me multitask and helped me, learn a lot of things in that regard.
Yeah, so I am always curious about people during their high school years. So like 14 to 18, like I always like to frame it and who were you pretending to be, and how do you think other people saw you?
So high school was interesting because my father got really sick the year before freshman year, to the point where he was disabled, to the point where he couldn't work anymore. We had to sell off a lot of the businesses, aka a lot of them failed. And we ended up getting evicted, and we had to move from the really nice suburban community of North Andover, Massachusetts, to the, at the time, not so nice community of Lawrence, Massachusetts, which was one of only 3 or 4 cities in the entire state that had an unaccredited high school. Had always been taught and had always been, drilled into my head that you have to work hard, no one's going to do it for you, blah, blah, blah. The old bootstrap mentality that I don't think really applies anymore because of the way society has. But I decided to go to a private school. So I ended up applying to all these private schools. And of course, my dad being disabled was like, congratulations, you got into all these schools, but you have to pay for it yourself. So at that age of 14, I feel like I had to make a decision whether I was going to go to the not really good reputation public school or one of these private schools that were going to cost me $4, $5, $6, $10, $12,000 a year. And I made the choice to go to one of the private ones and pay for it myself. And so high school was an interesting experience because I went to a private Catholic school, in which, looking back on it now, I was definitely lucky enough because it was somewhat sheltered in that regard. And, there wasn't a lot of identity politics that was being played in 1994 at a private Catholic school in the middle of nowhere. And I didn't have time to really mess around with those issues that may or may not have arisen because I had to work. And so I would go to school, I would go to theater practice, I would go to football practice, and then I would go wash dishes from like 6 p.m. to 2 a.m., 5 days a week, 4 days a week, 4 or 5 days a week. And it was just what I had to do in order to pay tuition. And so that applied to me. I learned how to juggle. I learned how to not say no to whatever I could do. And I learned the value of my education because I was literally paying for it myself with my own hands, with my own dishpan hands every day. And I would get home at 2 a.m. I would do homework for 1 or 2 or 3 hours. I would go to sleep. I wake up at 6:30. And you can do that when you're 14. If I try that now, see you later. I'd have to be, in bed for a week. But it taught me a lot. It taught me to the point where once I was ready to go to college, I shot my shot, and I applied to Emerson College. I applied to a bunch of schools, but Emerson was my dream school, and I got in, and I did the same thing. I went up and I was like, let's pay for college myself. And so I did it. I knew how to do it. I knew what steps to enact. But my college experience, as far as who I was, taught me that, at that time, if you wanted to get it done, you had to do it yourself. B, taught me that, it was so, I met some of the most incredible people and some of the most incredible teachers that knew what I was going through. And you don't realize it when you're that young, but looking back on it now, like some of my most incredible teachers, like Leo McHugh, like Greg Gurry, they were there, and looking back, you see it now, you're like, they knew what I was going through. And they really wanted to help open some doors for me. And it made a whole difference for me. It made me realize that I could make it happen.
And so what was the motivation to go to Emerson? What was the plan? What did you want to do?
It's so funny. I was playing sports. I was doing theater. I was, I loved medicine. And I ended up getting a super small part in the junior year musical. And I think it was South Pacific. It was like a throwaway part. And I was like, heck, like everything else I was doing in my life, I wanted to do it as best I could. So I dove into it. I really studied the character, the history of World War II in the South Pacific, even though I was a stupid throwaway character, to the point where the president of the theater guild, this is how important this moment was in my life, Brendan Murphy, who was an incredible human being, pulled me aside one day. I was 14, 15, and he said, listen, Carlos, I just want you to know that you have the most incredible stage presence I've ever seen in my life. And, when you have the senior talking to you as a sophomore or junior, it's like it's like, oh my gosh, like this is Elvis, like what's going on? So it really stuck with me, and it really like molded me to who I am. That summer, I went to see Phantom of the Opera, which is the first, big theater show that I ever saw, and seeing the chandelier, do its thing at the beginning of the show and go up into the audience. So those two events combined said to me, oh, I think I can go to school for theater. I think I can do. This is what I want to do. This is my calling. Everything's happening. I have to do it. And so I said, let's go do it. Let's go make it happen.
I am curious about Boston.
Yeah.
I'm from Chicago, so it's like I feel like they're similar wavelengths, but I also feel like Boston has a bad rap.
Sure.
So I'm curious about your experience, how you describe to Boston as someone that's ever been there.
I will be 100% honest. The Boston reputation, I didn't realize was there until post 9/11. To give you some background, I had a full beard when I was in college, right? I had the whole chin strap with the whole thing, and I had much curlier, longer hair. And then 9/11 happened, and boy, did that reputation come out of the woodwork. I was verbally and almost physically many, many times, but verbally many, many times assaulted because of the way I looked. Because as you can tell, I'm what they call ethnically ambiguous, right? You can say I'm Lebanese, you can say that I'm Greek, you can say I'm Italian, you can say that I'm Dominican, you can say that, funny, the thing that I least look like to me is Argentinian, which is the irony. But a lot of stuff happened to me after that. A lot of looks, a lot of, are you this, are you that? A lot of internal fighting, because whenever I was called one of these derogatory terms that apply to people from the Middle East, my first, response in my head was like, I'm not one of the, I can't say that because that makes me just as bad. So it was a lot of sucking it in and taking it in and just putting my head down. And look, I'm not a small guy. 9 times out of 10, if it had come to, anything with these people, I would have beat their asses. But I also know that if I had been the first one to do anything physically, who knows what would have happened, with law enforcement and whatnot. So the reputation is definitely there. The only thing that was my saving grace was 2 things. One, the college community is a bit more welcoming. Emerson is known as one of the most open, diverse schools, not culturally, but as far as LGBTQ and as far as those things, it was always number 1 on all the lists. I was one of 3 Latinos at the school, and there were 2 black kids, and we ended up becoming friends because that's how it works. But besides that, it was a bubble. It was definitely a bubble. And then I ended up falling into the music business, and I ended up touring with a band. And so it was funny. I was almost given this, because I was in a band, a successful band, a popular band in Boston. We had that VIP pass, you know what I mean? It was you had all these frat boys, from BU and from all these schools coming to our shows, that I feel like if they were drunk and I wasn't in a band, they might say a thing. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? So I had those 2 things going for me in that regard. So I was able to see it in a different lens. But post 9/11, for a while there, it was pretty rough. Yeah.
And I'm also curious about the Latinx community in Boston and Massachusetts, because I don't have any cultural identifiers for what that even could be.
Oh, sure. Lawrence, Massachusetts, again, this is going back to the 90s and the early 2000s, was a very big Dominican and Puerto Rican melting pot. A lot of it was an incredible influx of Caribbean, specifically those 2 immigrants coming into Lawrence. Unfortunately, like a lot of times in this country, the government gave up on the city as that was happening, because it was happening. And so, as I mentioned, that happened to be one of the cities that was unaccredited. They literally gave up on high school because Lawrence and Lowell, Massachusetts were the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution in this country, right? So we had all the agrarian stuff happening with the plantations in the South, but industry started coming up and they started building all these factories and all these, cotton processing factories. And the biggest ones were Lawrence and Lowell. In fact, Lawrence has the biggest mill in the universe, right? So and so you had all these immigrants. But then something happened where when industry started to leave and the Latinos started to come up, everyone was like, well, Lawrence is going to hell. It was basically the LatinX Detroit, for lack of better terminology. And so it became not a great area. And so it's unfortunate and it's awful. And I haven't been back in a long time that this happens all over. If you look at all these, if you were running for president as a Republican right now, or I guess back in November, you would say Democrat-run cities, but there's a reason, because you forget about them and you don't care. And so that was definitely something that I saw growing up, and being, Dominican and being raised by a Puerto Rican, I definitely felt that something wasn't right. Something wasn't going on. And that's also subconsciously why maybe I wanted to get out, and I wanted to go to better pastures. And looking back on it now, it's like, well, I wish we didn't have to have that choice. I wish that the cities were all equal and like everything was, everyone had opportunity. And I think we're getting there in 2020. I think we're closer. We have a long way to go, but it was definitely much, 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 much. The chasm was massive in 1997.
And so, what did you get up to after Emerson?
Yeah, so I went to Emerson. I was studying theater. I was going to be the next big Broadway star. I was going to do this. It was amazing. I got cast as one of the leads in the fall musical as a sophomore, which was unheard of. And I lost my voice. Like 2 days before opening. The show was Big River. I was the Duke. I can still sing you all the songs, from memory. I remember my outfits. It was going to be incredible. In fact, one of the directors of that show was a gentleman named Miguel Cervantes, who is Hamilton on Broadway. So it was like, it was supposed to be it. I lost my voice, killed me, wrecked my heart, wrecked my brain, almost killed the passion for theater inside me, to the point where I was like, well, I can never do this again. I'm going to start writing my ideas. I ended up learning how to play guitar. And I swear to you, I blinked and I had started a band. We had played 800 shows over the next 6-7 years. We had toured the country. We had won Boston Music Awards. We had headlined all the major venues. By the way, House of Blues in Chicago, packed that bad boy. It was amazing. Just an amazing experience. Toured with G-Love, toured with Jurassic 5, toured with OAR, Dropkick Murphys, the Wailers, like a whole bunch of incredible acts. And that kind of, you blink and you have this plan. And then all of a sudden, I'm 28 years old, 29 years old. The band is over. My relationship is at the time is over, and I'm sitting there at the wrong end of my 20s in Boston with like $8 in my bank account, thinking, "Well, shit, what do I do now?"
And so, what did you do?
Well, I'm glad you asked. A friend of mine, Nico, was working for Ben Affleck on his new movie at the time called The Town, and he said to me, "Hey, I can get you a small little audition if you want." And I was like, "Sure, whatever." I auditioned, they put me in as a glorified extra, and I got the bug. I got the bug again after 10 years. And I said to myself, well, I'm only 29 and I'm only, a large dude. Let me move out to LA and become a movie star. Because I've always hopped from one pipe dream to another, rock star, a Broadway star, movie star. And so I came out here, did a couple of commercials, but it wasn't until I met my mentor and I met some other incredible creatives that my career shifted into where it finally found its home and ended up.
Yeah, so I am curious about people when they first moved to LA. So can you sort of describe those first 2 years? Because I always say those are the hardest.
You're not wrong. So luckily, 95% probably of other creatives when they move out here, when they're at a younger age, I was waiting tables. I was waiting tables in Boston, and I was so lucky to be able to transfer from that restaurant in Boston to a restaurant in LA. I don't know what I would have done. I moved out here with $75. I had like half a dozen of my friends be like, here's $50, here's $25, here's $100 to tide you over. And I will never forget those friends ever. I still talk to them daily. But, you know, I got here, two of my friends who I was going to be roommates with, they had come earlier and they had gotten the house that we were living in. And they tell me, oh, we got a house in North Hollywood. And I was like, Hollywood? This is great. I can't wait to live in the middle of Hollywood. This is amazing. North Hollywood, probably, you know, right next to the Capitol building, probably. So I get off and I'm coming back from the airport. We had picked up a couple boxes and we're driving on the 101. We see the Capitol building and I'm like, oh my God, this is where are we going? Why are we driving past? Why is it? And we just kept driving because I didn't know that North Hollywood meant the fucking valley. So, you know, we pull up to this suburban, you know, the valley area. And I'm looking around and I'm like, this is not Hollywood. This is the valley. And so luckily they were great. We had a great little house and it was a great starting point. I busted my ass, you know, as far as waiting tables and then trying to be creative during the day with auditions, with writing projects. And I started to really take this, because I had written so many of the songs for the band and because I had really loved to tell a story, whether it be on stage or, you know, musically or theatrically, I started to really put these ideas and these stories on paper. And so I started writing for a couple little super small independent websites. And, you know, that's when you said the first 2 years the hardest, almost like clockwork. About a year and a half later, I met my mentor and, you know, one of my best friends in the world, Sean Crouch, who was a big TV writer. And we had gotten connected through a friend of a friend and who wanted me to help co-produce a small movie that he had written, that he was directing, that another guy was directing. And we hit it off. We just hit it off. And, you know, I didn't know what the hell TV writing was. I thought it was, you just showed up and, you know, all the actors made up the lines, blah, blah, blah. And I said, so I want to give this a shot. Let me see what the dealio is with are we still saying dealio? I don't think we're saying dealio anymore, right? No, okay. You can don't keep it in so I really sound old. It's like Mandy Patinkin over here. But I said, I want to give this a shot. And he said, yeah, sure. Let's see what you got. Write me a script. And so I wrote the script about, you guessed it, waiting tables. And he reads it and he goes, this is terrible. This is the worst thing I've ever read in my life. Don't ever write a script about waiting tables again. Nobody cares. Everybody has a waiting table script. And I was like, really? He goes, yes. But I go, but my story, he goes, nobody cares. It's the same story. It's the same story no matter who it is or what it is. You know, looking back on it now, AOC should write it because I'd watch that one. But what he did, though, you know, I do give him a gruff, and I do portray him as some kind of evil, you know, the first part. But what he really did, in a sense, was tell me what to do going forward. And he said, I hear your voice, but we have to figure out how to get it out properly. And so over the next 3 or 4 years, he really did give me a master class in writing and really did teach me what to do, what not to do, how to do it. And I also learned a lot of stuff in addition, you know, through trial and error and through studying and through learning and through reading and watching as many things as I could do. And I found myself, you know, really, you know, discovering, I think it was around 2013, that like, oh, this is what I want to do. I think I found it, you know. I was hired the next year by a website called Upworthy, who invented clickbait. So we're sorry about that. But the whole phrase, you won't believe what happens next, you know, was created by some of my near and dear coworkers. And so that really taught me a whole nother facet of writing, you know, how to really draw people in and how to really find how to be completely succinct, concise, clickbaity, but also have some substance, you know. So, you know, Upworthy happened and then Sean, sure enough, got the showrunning gig on The Exorcist. And he said to me, look, you know, they already staffed up everything, but do you want to be support? And I was like, yes, I'll do whatever you want. I want to be in the room where it happens. Let's go. Let's do this. And I went and started on The Exorcist, and I soaked it all in. I was a showrunner's assistant / writer's assistant, and I was filling in, and I made sure to be there, you know, 7, 8 in the morning and be there till 7, 8, 9, 10 at night. No matter what happens, to learn everything I could. I ended up going on set in Vancouver, you know, every 4 weeks with him. And it was one of the greatest experiences of my life, to the point where, because I had my samples and because I had that experience, when he got the showrunning gig on Lore, Amazon brought me on as a staff writer. So I was able to break in that way. And again, going back to, washing dishes till 2 a.m, going back to paying my way through college, through high school, to coming out here, to doing whatever it is that I had to do. I flew myself out to Prague to produce my episode of television, because staff writers typically don't get flown out to produce their episodes, but I wanted to get that experience. And, being 38, 39 at the time, you feel the clock and you're like, I don't want to coast. I have to go make it happen. So I went, and it was a mind-blowing experience. I spent 12 days there. I had pre-production on one episode, produced my episode, pre-production on another episode. I learned everything. I was there, just the entire day on set, getting it all going, to the point where when I came back, Sean had to say for the rest of the episodes, as a showrunner, he said, I need you to run post. And I was like, you need me to what? Run post. And he goes, you know what you're doing. Do it. And so the next 4 months, I learned that, and I was trial by fire, and I was in there, and I was in the edit bays, and I was at the mixes, and I was, at color, and I was working with the supervisor and the coordinator and the composers. My music background came into play with the composers. So I'm working with the composers and be like, listen, I like this theme. Can we maybe take it to the next level here? What do you think of this? How about this sound? And so that created an incredible relationship with my composer. Because of my design background, I had minored in marketing at Emerson. I was able to work with, Elastic, one of the greatest opening title companies in the entire universe. They've done The Crown, they've done Black Sails, they've done Daredevil, they've done Watchmen. They are the, creme de la creme. And I'm sitting there working with them one-on-one as to what I think we should do for our title sequence and our opening sequence. And then the acting, and then the writing, everything that I had learned, just kind of for the first time, it was like Captain Planet, and I was like, let's go recycle some shit. Like it was amazing. Amazon noticed, and Amazon said, okay, we like you, we love you, we're gonna double bump you to co-producer for the next season, which is unheard of, especially for a POC. We've read all these stories. So kudos to Amazon for doing that. Kudos to Amazon for opening those doors for me. Again, my hard work is one thing, but the opportunities and the luck is also another thing. It's undeniable. It doesn't matter how hard you work. Someone's got to open some doors. Someone's got to teach you some stuff. For me, being able to be in these rooms, in my first 3 years of hardcore in the business with, Sean Crouch, Jeremy Slater, Alyssa Clark, Becky Kirsch, Yasmin Yilmaz, Ashley Edward Miller, Jose Molina, my goodness, I'm probably forgetting Julie Benson, Shauna Benson, like these titans, these gods and goddesses of our industry, to be able to be there and to be able to have them respect you and not just, think, oh, you're the diversity hire, because, they never made me feel that way, was mind-blowing. And to have them, welcome me to pitch into their ideas and to have them pitch into mine and to really break story together is to me one of the most incredible experiences of my life. And if my career ended tomorrow, I would still have glowing memories and glowing flashbacks of those times in the rooms where, I would pitch something and one of these incredible writers would be like, okay, how about, and I'd be, yes, let's do it together. And so that to me will always stick with me.
You mentioned that like the clock is ticking. I feel like a lot of people feel it in LA.
Yeah.
Like people don't even like to say their age.
Yeah.
So for the people that are like 21 and just moved to LA, to the people that are 41 and still try to do this thing, like what would you say to them? Because as someone who like definitely felt that pressure and was like, what am I doing? When is this going to pay off? Like,
well, I think I tweeted this a couple of months ago, and somehow it a lot of people reacted to it, and it's understandable why. I sold my first series at 41. Literally at 41 years old. I turned 41 in September. I sold this at the end of August. And knock on wood, by the time you hear this, hopefully we're about to have an offer on my second series. And it's the tortoise and the hare. You know what I mean? Like it's not when you get there. I think it's how you get there. And if you're 21, God bless you. So much fun. Do it all. Figure out if this is for you, because at 21, if you had talked to me, I thought I was going to be the next Dave Matthews. At 28, I thought I was going to be, the next Ben Affleck. At 38, hopefully I can be the next. God, there's so many incredible writers, but I want to be the first Carlos Foglia, essentially. You know what? The next Lin-Manuel Miranda. You know what I mean? Like, so So it always changes. It always fluctuates. If you're 21 and you're in LA and you want to be a screenwriter, the good news is you have so much life ahead of you. You have so many more opportunities. Things like this, La Lista, things like all the stuff that Jorge Rivera has been doing, things like all the pre-WGA stuff, things like, I mean, the internet technology. 20 years ago, you couldn't go on Twitter to try to, be like, hey, I'm a writer, hire me. There wasn't that. It didn't exist, So that's the good news. If you're 41, you may think it's time's closing and the door's closing, but use that to your advantage. Use all the seasoning that you have on your old crusty body and use it to your advantage and all the experiences, because that is also, as much as being so old can be a bad thing, in some eyes, because you're older, this is not the NBA. It's not like you have to go dunk at 41. Your brain is still there, and you have 20 years of life experience, and you have 20 years to draw upon. My stories before my father passed away in 2012 are different than my stories are now, 100%. So you have that extra window of all the stuff that you've been through that may or may not, influence your writing. Also, if you're out here and you're in your 30s and you still haven't cracked open the door, it can happen. It can definitely happen. I am living proof that it can happen, especially as a POC. Like, there's a lot of cards stacked against us, and to be able to be there and to be able to see what the process is like. Again, 2013, 2014, I was waiting tables, and I said this before on our interviews. I don't knock that. Waiting tables is one of the most incredible experiences of my life. You want to talk about multitasking? That teaches you how to multitask. That teaches you how to interact with people. If you want to be in a room, there's very few things that are better than having waiting tables in a high traffic environment, because you want to talk about working with others. If you don't work with others well, that food's not getting out. If you don't get the order right and the drink isn't made right and the food isn't at the right temperature and you don't fire there's so much going on that you literally take that experience in a writer's room and you understand how to pitch, how to listen, how never to punch down, how to make sure that you're trying to break the story the right way. Like, you learn it all and everything comes into play. So as much as my design and my music and my theatrical experience came into play, so did my waiting tables, because I learned how to work with people. I learned how to work together to achieve a goal, whether it's a beautiful meal for someone or a script or a show. It's all the same. We're just trying to entertain people and make them happy, or think one way or the other.
And so, I've seen that you've worked on some very spooky shows. So yeah. I'm curious about what's your writing like? Like, what are the themes? What are the stories that are attractive to you? What keeps calling you in your storytelling?
Sure. It's funny. There are two major things, and I think this comes out in December, right? So hey, happy December. Can I announce the one that I just finished? It's another horror show. So yeah. So there are a bunch of horror shows, which oddly enough wasn't necessarily my first dive into stuff. The spooky things wasn't what I go. Historical fiction is what I love. I love the 19th century, and I love now, as I get older, trying to find little things that are, sorry, those are my dogs, they're going crazy, little things that tie into whether it be the immigrant experience in one way or another. So sometimes you get to do all of it. So for example, for Lore, my episode was about two serial killers, immigrants in Scotland in 1829. So they're not Latino, but they're immigrants in a new land that are being treated as second-class citizens, trying to rise, and no matter what they do, they're being kept down by the man. Does that sound familiar? So these stories are always there, and I try to find these stories that tell the story of people like me, whether they look like me or not. That always really gets me going. One of the shows that I sold is basically a Latin American coming-of-age story. How do I do this without spoiling? That has a reverse immigration angle to it. So these Americans that are half Latino, Latinx, they end up in their native country, and so how they get treated when they get there. Spoiler: it's really nice, not like America. So it's I'm always trying to find something that ties into that, especially post losing my dad and kind of having that mortality inside me. A lot of my stuff is influenced by keeping his memory somewhat alive in my own way.
As someone who's been trying to break in for a while and now has broken in, what do you think, just from when you first started, what do you think are the the changes you've seen in like diversity and inclusion, and what do you think we still have to do, you know?
And I think as I mentioned earlier, there was this permeating mentality back in the day about just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and and as long as you work hard, it's going to happen. And I was guilty of drinking that Kool-Aid, and to an extent, sure, it every now and then it happens, but there are clearly systemic issues that we are surrounded with, and clearly failures on behalf of society as a whole that are aimed at keeping people like you and me out of the room where it happens. Like that's just fact. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing we can say about it. We're still looking at, I was nominated to run for the WGA board, and so as I was doing my research while deciding whether to run or not, actually, side note, I ended up not running because I had so much work to do to keep working hard to be able to stay where I'm at. You know what I mean? So a lot of other people that were lucky enough to run, whatever, they can run. They don't care. They can spend the $1,000 for all the emails and the this and the that, and that just wasn't in the cards for me. So I had to choose keep my career going at full speed or take my gas off the pedal in order to run for the board. As much as I was passionate about it, as much as I was honored, and as much as I wanted to, I couldn't do it because the things weren't in place that allowed me to be able to choose which one was more important. So 2020, how to break in, there are so many more opportunities, but there are still so many barriers. And I think that we are lucky enough that we are in an age where things like this exist, and things like all of the stuff that we have on technology exist, that we're being read more. And I think that's what's important. We're being considered more. I mean, God, yesterday, again, this was a couple months ago, what was it? Marvel tweeted, "We're looking for black writers to write Blade." You think that would have happened 5 years ago? No, they would have picked one of the 4 white dudes that write all the Marvel stuff. You know what I mean? Like, they would have been like, well, one of the Russo brothers is Southern Italian. That's black enough. Like, that's what they would have done. And so God bless technology. God bless them being able to do that. Now, do I wish they would have, called the agencies and been like, or the WGA, but still, it all ships rise with the tide. And I think that's the mentality that we are adopting more and more. And we're realizing that the tide, the sea, the ocean is big enough for all of us. 20 years ago, there were like 7 channels, Now we have 7,000 channels. So we should have 693 more opportunities for all of us to write. And so there is also, speaking of Blade and black writers, like, we're finally getting to that point where, like, you know what, if there's a story about, a Puerto Rican, maybe we should look for some Puerto Rican writers, Like, sure, you want to have some white writers in the room? Sure. But you got to have at least a couple Puerto Rican writers writing about Puerto Rico. You know what I mean? Like, that's just the way it should be, and I'm glad that it's becoming that more and more. But we still have a long way to go.
Speaking of writers, like, who are some of the writers that you admire? These could be heroes, peers, friends, people you creep on social media.
Well, it's funny. There's the list is endless. As far as Latinx writers go, there are the standard bearers, and there's the Tanya Sarachos and the Jose Molinas and the Javier Grillo Marchos, and this. I love Santa Sierra. She's a personal friend. I love Danny Tolle. He's one of my favorite people in the world. Jorge Rivera has been doing the Lord's work, as far as spreading love. Obviously, Dan Hernandez, not to be confused with Danny Fernandez. They're both at the top of their game. And then Gloria and Dalen and all, they're all there. On a personal level, people that have taken my career to the next level, there is Sean Crouch, who will be at the top of my list. He's the guy. He's my best friend. I have actually Edward Miller, Alyssa Clark, Becky Kirsch. These are people that everybody should research and read if they can. Yasmin Yilmaz. And God, I mean, I'm probably blanking out on a million more. But those dozen or so are incredible, not just writers, but incredible people and incredible humans. And I think in this city, that's sometimes hard to come by. Whether or not you present that, on the screen publicly, everyone can think that you're the nicest person in the world. But we know that you're kind of a dick. So it's interesting to see that. But these people, completely, are awesome people.
Like, what has been your experience of like pitching, selling shows, being in development? Like, what's that been like?
It's been incredible. I have I have 5 projects in active development. One of which hopefully by the time this airs will have sold as well. And it's 4 out of those 5 are completely Latin centric. The process, we are still at a point, and you'll see this on Twitter, where as I'm getting closer and closer, the question is always like, okay, so let's see who we can attach with you to try to sell this. And that's sometimes is code for, let's see what white guy we can bring on that has a big name. And look, sometimes for some of my projects that aren't necessarily set in Latin America, hey, whatever makes it that'll sell it, let's go. I've never run a show, so I can't be so crazy as to think that someone's going to give me $90 million for a TV show. And they want some security, they want some collateral, they want some assurance. And if that means that I have the opportunity to work with someone massive, sure, let's go rock and roll. Again, going back to that that top 50 showrunner, most powerful showrunners list in Hollywood, maybe if we had a handful of Latin writers, Latin showrunners on that list, maybe those would be the people that you would go to. But the problem that you have then is that if there's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, there's like 2,000 of us, that are trying to write these Latin stories. They can't attach to all of them. So there has to be some kind of way where we can all rise together in that regard. The response, especially in 2020, has been fantastic to all these Latin stories. I don't know if it's lip service. I don't know if it's because of the times, or I don't know if we're actually evolving. But I'll take it. I'm getting these meetings. We're pitching these stories that are interesting takes on crazy stories, that are interesting new ideas. A lot of my stuff. In fact, I'm looking at my list right here. I would say 85% of all of my shows are originals. They're not based on IP. They're not based on real people. So that in itself is a challenge, even if I wasn't Latino, even if it was 2015, because IP still rules, and we love to reboots of reboots. That seems to be the thing that gets eyeballs on things. But again, there's 7,000 channels. So the benefit of having 7,000 channels that adds all these jobs. The detriment is that people want to do the best they can with their channels to get the most eyeballs. So God bless the Addams family. People are complaining about it on Twitter like they do, but people know what the Addams family is. So that's going to give that channel, a bit more eyeballs, and so they'll do whatever it takes to get those viewers and to keep going. If not, you turn into Quibi, and look what happened there. So
R.I.P. Quibi.
R.I.P. My goodness.
So where can people find you on social media?
LA Carlos is my Twitter, and that's pretty much it. I do have an LA Carlos Instagram, but that's more for friends and family. But hey, if you want to friend me, and you never know. But LA Carlos Twitter is pretty much my entire social media appearance. I have a website, but again, you can go to IMDb, you can go to my WGA page, whatever it is. But yeah, I mean, Twitter is where we have conversations.
So I like to ask my guests to help title the episode. Mm-hmm. So the prompt is a blank Latinx writer. In that blank, you can put more than one word. You can mix them all around. Just what feels true to you, your writing, this conversation. Mm-hmm. I also like to use it as a way to build community. So if someone sees that title, they can be like, oh, this person's like me. Let me listen. Let me reach out.
The first thing that comes to mind would be an overnight success, 15 years in the making, Latinx writer. I think that's been my story. That's something a lot of people have really glommed onto, because I'm not 21, I'm not 25, I'm not 30. I may look like I'm 19 and perfect. Let's be honest, right? Everyone's going to see this, right? But I'm 41, and that is the reality of it. And so a lot of people are like, oh my God, you did this. And I've talked to friends and stuff that have been like, oh, you made it so fast. And I literally, my brain hits the brakes, and it's like, what did you say? Like, look at me. Are you kidding? So I think that is my story. Obviously, the Latinx in there tells people about where I'm from and where I've come from and how I use that to tell my stories. But if you wanted a modifier in that regard, it is a line of hope to anyone that does see that it is possible. It does take time. It can take time. And for everybody that writes their first script and wins a Nichols, or wins a blacklist, or for every one of those, there's about 100 of me. And so And so it's okay. It's okay. And we're here, and we're here to listen. We're here to read. And if you're a good person, and if you tell a great story, and if you're open to people trying to help you, then you're going to go far. And it may take a while, but you will get there. Conversely, if you're a dick and you're pretentious and you think that you have to make it right off the bat, I'm probably going to read your script, never talk to you again, and tell everyone I know that you're kind of a dick. So it's a whole thing. Like, you know, if you're here and you want to do it, and you're a good person, like that's what it comes down to. Like, that's really the most important thing. And I think that the windows and the doors are opening up for us more and more as we go along. Obviously, I'm an older generation, so it took me a little longer to get through that door. But these doors are there, and now that I'm kind of inside, I'm holding that bad boy open like Hodor. That's a bad example because he didn't really, spoilers, he dies. Did we know this? We know this, yeah. But I'm like Hodor that lives. You know what I mean? But instead of closing it, I'm opening it. So the analogy doesn't work. I'm a writer.
So, well, that's what we'll leave off on.